Keong Mars, Love and Magic in the Kingdom of Kediri. This story begins in the Kingdom of Panjalu, with its capital at Darhar or Kediri. The king of Kediri had two daughters. The first was Dewi Chandrakarana, and the second was Dewi Ajeng. Unfortunately, Dewi Chandrakarana's mother passed away from an illness when she was still very young. The king then remarried, and with his new queen, he had a daughter named Dewi Ajeng. Chandrakarana was a beautiful girl. She had a kind character, a gentle demeanor, and a soft heart. She was liked by everyone. Meanwhile, Dewi Ajeng was the daughter of the new queen. Her face was also beautiful, but Chandrakarana's face was even more beautiful and gentle. There was a hint of a cruel and rigid nature in Dewi Ajeng. The king of Panjalu had planned to arrange a marriage between Chandrakarana and Raden Ainu Kurtapati from the kingdom of Jengalar. A month ago, Raden Ainu Kurtapati visited Darhar. He had seen and met Chandrakarana. Both of them felt a connection, with one being handsome and the other being exceptionally beautiful. The king of Darhar had planned that 40 days after their initial meeting, an official engagement would take place. Raden Ainu Kurtapati, along with the royal family of Jengalar, would come to propose to Chandrakarana. The engagement was now just a few days away. Chandrakarana had prepared herself as best as she could. "No, I will not allow Chandrakarana to be with Raden Ainu Kurtapati," muttered Dewi Ajeng, who was envious and jealous. That night, Dewi Ajeng consulted with her mother. Her mother suggested that she visit grandmother Gagak, a sorceress renowned for her powerful magic. Determined to achieve her goal of being with Raden Ainu Kurtapati, she was willing to travel far to grandmother Gagak's place. After receiving provisions from the sorceress, Dewi Ajeng immediately returned to the palace. She arrived at the palace at midnight, exhausted from the long journey. "We must find a way to drive Chandrakarana out of this palace. How can we do it, mother?" The queen remained silent for a moment, then smiled brightly. She remembered Chandrakarana's daily task of serving a cup of tea to her father. That was what the queen planned to use to their advantage. The next day, the plan was put into action. Before Chandrakarana could perform her duty, the queen quietly entered the kitchen. She placed poison in the teacup that the palace servant had prepared for Chandrakarana to bring to her father. The queen's heart pounded as she was about to leave the kitchen, and came face to face with Chandrakarana. "Oh, mother, why do you trouble yourself to come to the kitchen?" Chandrakarana asked. "Nothing, it's nothing. I just came to check on the servant's work," the queen replied. "Thank you, mother, for taking the time to supervise the preparations for Raden Ainu Kurtapati's arrival," Chandrakarana said innocently, believing that the queen was sympathetic towards her. As usual, Chandrakarana brought a cup of tea to her father. This activity was done to strengthen the bond between father and daughter. Typically, while drinking tea, they would chat about family matters. The king drank half of the cup of tea. It felt warm in his throat and stomach. "Your tea is indeed delicious, my child," said the king. "Thank you, father," replied Chandrakarana. But shortly after, the king clutched his stomach, feeling increasingly nauseous. "Chandrakarana," he exclaimed. "What's happening, my dear? What's wrong?" "You tea," instead of answering. The king's eyes narrowed, his breath became labored. Then he started vomiting blood. Chandrakarana quickly hugged her father, who was about to collapse. The queen pointed accusingly at Chandrakarana. "What have you done? How dare you try to kill your own father? You must have poisoned him. No. I would never poison father, Chandrakarana exclaimed. The king was immediately carried to his bed. The palace physician arrived promptly to examine him. The face of the royal physician from Kediri showed tension as he carefully examined the king's body. After a few moments, the physician breathed a sigh of relief, although the king had not yet regained consciousness. The poison has affected him, said the physician. But it's not too severe. Nevertheless, he needs complete rest for several days. The next day, the king regained consciousness. He couldn't believe that his own daughter intended to harm him. Chandrakarana, what do you truly desire? He asked. I only wish for your health and happiness, father, she replied. But the evidence suggests you tried to kill me. It wasn't me, father. I am not the one responsible. The law must be upheld in this kingdom, even for my own child. The evidence and witnesses have implicated you in this heinous act. By rights, you should face the death penalty. However, I will show leniency. You must leave this palace. Father, please investigate this matter further. I am innocent. You must leave this palace. With tears streaming down her face, Chandrakarana reluctantly left the palace of Kediri. Now she was alone, with no one by her side. She walked aimlessly, her steps heavy with sorrow, until she reached the shore. Unbeknownst to Chandrakarana, Juyajeng and grandmother Gagakirang had been secretly following her from a distance all this time. Grandma Gagakirang, that's Chandrakarana, Juyajeng whispered. Yes, I already knew. Wait here. Let me handle this myself, grandmother Gagakirang replied. The old woman hurried towards Chandrakarana. When she was close enough, she began chanting her incantations. Her black staff was raised into the air several times. She took a deep breath, expanding her stomach. Juyajeng, standing beside grandmother Gagakirang, shivered with fear. At that moment, Chandrakarana stood near a rocky cliff. The sorceress blew air with all her might. A strong wind filled with magical energy surged towards Chandrakarana. Her body was thrown towards the edge of the sea. Upon touching the seawater, Chandrakarana's body suddenly transformed into a golden-colored shellfish. Juyajeng caught the shellfish and threw it with all her might into the middle of the sea. Thank you, grandmother, said Juyajeng as she took out her money pouch. Here is money for you for successfully helping me. Chandrakarana drifted in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves. The unfortunate girl could do nothing but pray for the almighty deities to help and bring her safely back to land. Chandrakarana, a gentle and kind-hearted girl, had her prayers answered. Gradually, the waves carried her closer to a calm shore. Coincidentally, on the edge of that beach, there was an old grandmother fishing. She had intended to go home but was still casting her small net. Now, she had caught one more quite big fish. She was very grateful. She dipped the net back into the water. Chandrakarana, now transformed into a shellfish, was carried by the waves to the shore. She crawled onto a black rock. Coincidentally, the old grandmother had anchored her boat not far from where the shellfish was located. This shellfish looks cute and sweet. All right, I'll take it home with me. I'll take care of you, said the old grandmother. The golden shellfish was then taken by the grandmother and placed alongside the fish she had caught in her fish basket. The shellfish now felt relieved not to be tossed around in the sea anymore. It wanted to express gratitude to the grandmother, but sadly, it couldn't speak. Not long after, the old grandmother brought the golden shellfish to a small hut. She placed the fish she had caught that day on a pottery dish, including the golden shellfish. The golden shellfish was placed near a water pitcher inside her house. The grandmother then went to gather firewood for cooking. Shortly after, she returned to prepare the fish she had caught. By nightfall, the grandmother was exhausted and fell into a deep sleep. Unbeknownst to her, it was that very night that the golden shellfish transformed back into a beautiful girl, who was none other than Chandrakirana. As it turned out, the magic's influence disappeared when night fell. The next morning, when the grandmother woke up, she was surprised, truly astonished. On her dining table, inside her house, various delicious foods had been laid out. After breakfast, the grandmother went to the beach to fish. That afternoon, her luck was somewhat lacking. She had tried her hardest to catch fish throughout the day, but by late afternoon, she had only caught one fish. With weary steps, she returned home. With only one fish, she couldn't exchange it for rice or other groceries at the village market. Exhausted and disappointed, she quickly rested. Before long, she fell into a deep sleep until morning. She was again surprised in the morning by the presence of delicious dishes on the table. The golden shellfish finally realized that the sorceress grandmother's curse lifted at night, allowing her to return to her human form for a few hours. Taking advantage of this opportunity, she expressed her gratitude to the fisherman grandmother by cooking a meal for her. The incidents at the dining table didn't happen just once, but repeatedly. This piqued the curiosity of the fisherman grandmother. One day, after fishing, the grandmother pretended to sleep. Night fell. Slowly, the grandmother blinked her eyes, peering into her home to see what was happening. She was truly shocked to witness the golden shellfish transform into a beautiful princess. Quickly, she got up from her bed. "Who are you?" asked the fisherman grandmother. "I am Chandrakirana, the princess of the kingdom of Darha. Somehow, I have inexplicably become a golden shellfish," Chandrakirana replied, surprised to be addressed by the fisherman grandmother. "Why did you cook food for me?" the fisherman grandmother asked. "I wanted to thank you for saving me from the shore," said Chandrakirana. "Oh, you're the golden shellfish I found on the beach." "Yes, grandmother. Please allow me to stay in this house with you," Chandrakirana pleaded. "It's all right. You can stay here. I will consider you as my own child," said the kind grandmother. "Thank you, dear grandmother," Chandrakirana replied gratefully. And so, during the day, Chandrakirana transformed into a golden shellfish. At nightfall, she returned to being a beautiful girl. "Don't worry, my child," said the grandmother. "I believe you are a good person. Let us continuously pray together to the Lord for your restoration to your original form." "You're welcome, my dear," replied the grandmother kindly. From that day on, Chandrakirana lived with the grandmother named Mokrondo Dardapan. Every night, Mokrondo Dardapan prayed to God for Chandrakirana's restoration to her original form. Meanwhile, in another place, in a village far from the bustling city, there was a handsome young man wandering around. "Oh, my dear Chandrakirana, where could you possibly be?" The young man was none other than Raden Ainu Kurtapati. He had been travelling to various villages in search of Chandrakirana, who had disappeared from the palace. One day, he met an elderly man by the roadside. "Young man, I haven't eaten for 3 days," the old man groaned. Raden Panji approached and helped the old man find shelter under a guava tree. He picked several ripe guavas for the old man. "Thank you, young man. You are very kind," said the old man. "Where are you headed?" "Actually," Radhaninu Kurtapati replied, "I am searching for Princess Chandrakirana, who was expelled from the kingdom of Kediri." The old man muttered to himself, and then showed him the way to where the Princess Chandrakirana was. Radhaninu Kurtapati then continued his journey following the path shown by the old man. He asked the people in every village he passed through about Princess Chandrakirana. Finally, he arrived at a village on the coast. Because he had not eaten or drunk anything for several days, he felt very thirsty. He asked for a drink from one of the residents. This resident happened to be Mokrondo Dardapan. "Excuse me, may I have a sip of water, ne?" asked Radhaninu Kurtapati politely. "Oh, sure. Just a moment, let me get it," replied the grandmother. The grandmother went into the house while Radhaninu Kurtapati waited outside. Radhaninu Kurtapati caught a whiff of delicious food. Perhaps the grandmother is cooking, he thought to himself. When the grandmother returned with a jug of water, Radhaninu Kurtapati asked, "What are you cooking?" "Oh, it's not me who's cooking," replied the grandmother. Mokrondo Dardapan went on to explain at length about Chandrakirana, who was cursed to become a golden shellfish and found on the shore. "So, Chandrakirana is the one cooking in the kitchen," Radhaninu Kurtapati exclaimed happily. "Please, Nek, introduce us." Grandmother Dardapan then called Princess Chandrakirana. Panjaraninu Kurtapati. Princess Chandrakirana exclaimed, in joy upon meeting her beloved who disguised himself as a commoner. That very day, Prince Ainu invited Princess Chandrakirana and Grandmother Dardapan to return to the palace. When Prince Ainu and Princess Chandrakirana arrived at the kingdom of Kediri, Juliajeng was deeply shocked. She immediately sought out the witch grandmother. The witch grandmother revealed that her magic would be undone once Chandrakirana had met Prince Ainu. Juliajeng was very angry. She shouted, "Why didn't you say so earlier?" "What do you want then?" The witch grandmother challenged Juliajeng back. "Do you want me to turn you into a worm?" "No. Please, Grandma," pleaded Juliajeng. "You need to know and experience what it's like to be transformed into a snail." "No, Grandma. No." However, it was too late. The angered grandmother had already transformed her into a snail. However, its color was not gold, but black. Thus, Juliajeng had become a black snail. A day later after the event, Radhaninu Kurtapati and Chandrakirana officially announced their engagement. Shortly afterward, they married and lived happily ever after.